you don't need money to make money. You have to have the right contacts. You have to have the right idea. You have to be knowledgeable. You can't just walk out and say, hey, I've got this idea. Somebody give me 100 grand. I'm going to try it out. But you don't need your own money. Tired of watching your portfolio bounce up and down with every headline? Self-storage is stable, predictable, and built for long-term wealth. At Vondersmith Capital, we find the deals, structure the investments, and deliver returns Wall Street can't. Visit VondeCapital.com to book a call. That's VONDIE Capital.com. Welcome to the latest and greatest Control Alt Invest. We are resetting. Do we want to keep going with that? We're resetting it, right?
Yeah, we've come this far.
Yeah, why not? We're resetting thoughts on wealth, investing, money, economics, all of it.
Yeah.
Today's a very special day.
Why is that?
We have our first guest.
We do.
I'm very, very excited. I'm excited not just for today's guest. I'm excited we have a few guests coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too. It's not just you and I talking.
That's right. And what's exciting to me about guests isn't just that, we've got somebody else. It's the quality, the knowledge. These are other people who have pressed Control Alt Invest in their own lives and are excited to share it with us.
Yeah.
So this is great. So today we have Vinod Vangimalla. Vinod's a fellow economics graduate. We've been talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm sad it took 5 episodes for me to really flex my econ knowledge.
Yeah, me too. I'm surprised it took you that long to announce it.
Fellow econ graduate, University of Maryland, go Terps. He went out to California, got his master's in finance from UC Irvine. And then he took a job in Arizona, settled down in Arizona. That's where he currently resides. So if you need some warmth, go visit Vinod. Like a lot of us, he's really pursued this career in finance. He's currently director of finance at Value Savers, which is a for-profit thrift store. And that is, that's a scam we need to get into, James. Here's how it works. You take people's donations and then you sell it for a profit.
I love that.
It's like Facebook Marketplace, but corporate. Vinod's also a very accomplished poker player. This is not a joke. He's very, very good. In fact, in 2006, back when, do you remember Atlantic City?
Yeah.
That used to be
It's still there, right?
Well, somebody famous bankrupted a casino there, so it can't be that good. And this is actually very sad news. I'm very, very serious about this. I found out a month ago that the Atlantic City Bar and Grill closed down. It was a staple.
Was it?
I loved it there. It was a great, great place. And they closed down. So very sad about Atlantic City. But in 2006, he came in second in a large poker tournament.
Wow.
Very exciting. And then most importantly, again, I come off sarcastic. A lot of people tell me that they don't know when I'm being serious and when I'm not. But I'm being dead serious. Most important, he's a family man. He has a wife, 2 daughters. And actually, I'm excited. I'm going to bring this up. He's excited that I'm going to bring this up. He took his daughter to the Washington-Detroit football playoff game.
Oh, nice.
So we'll have to ask him about that and how that went.
That's cool.
But that was, of course, they ran into the Super Bowl champions.
Yeah.
Go Birds.
Go Birds.
So without further ado, unless you have some more ado, let's welcome Vinod to the show. Vinod, welcome.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you.
I just want to say that was a great intro, by the way. Thank you for that.
Good.
But I did not know about the Atlantic City Bar and Grill.
Isn't that sad?
That is the first time I'm hearing this, and that's disheartening to hear.
Yeah.
I did not. I had no idea.
Where was it? On the strip? I've been twice, and I was
Nobody knows.
inebriated, and both times.
It wasn't, I don't think it was on the strip. So when we used to go up in college, because back then that was the only place you could go and do nefarious things like play blackjack and poker and stuff. We stayed at Trumtage, but you had to take a little bit of back then they had taxi cabs. I don't know if you've heard of those. You had to take a taxi over to.
Oh, you're really showing your age now.
James is not our age.
No, he's not. Yeah.
You didn't just pull out your phone and just get a car right there?
Nope.
Whoa.
Yeah. But you had to take a 5-minute car ride over to the Atlantic City Bar and Grill. But it was one of those places that like a lot of famous people would have gone. And so all over the walls, they had like autographed like
Okay.
headshots and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was a cool place. And the food was delicious. So speaking of famous and awesomeness, Vinod, how was that football game that you took your daughter to?
I mean, that was such a cool experience. Like, you've met Aria before. Her name's Aria. She's 7 years old. One, I've never been to Ford Field, which is a great venue for football. And then two, it's the first time in like 30 years my team, the Commanders, are good, right? So that in itself was a cool experience. But just to see it from the eyes of like my 7-year-old who doesn't really know any of the rules. She just wants to be there and getting cotton candy and all that stuff, right? But when you're sitting there, she couldn't help herself but to like ask questions. And so, for example, when the teams are coming out, the Commanders are coming out, and the entire stadium's booing, from the eyes of a 7-year-old, she's like, that's not right. Like, that's wrong. Why would they do that? Like, she doesn't understand the whole home field advantage, that kind of stuff. And then, like, the flags are getting thrown. And she was just asking really curious and good questions about the game. And I was like, it was just a cool experience to share that with her, to be honest.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you think she's going to be more hyped next season?
I think she'll be hyped to go to the game. I don't think she'll be watching them with me on TV, but I think she'll be excited to go to a game.
That's cool.
Kids are funny like that, and I remember that from my childhood. You know, we're big Orioles fans, and so with baseball season, there's a game almost every day. And after dinner, the kids get showered and stuff, and I'll have the game on, and they're like, "Oh, the Orioles," but then they go do something else.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, Eagles Cowboys, huge rivalry. I'd be outside playing football with my friends, and I was curious what was going on. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, you don't want to sit there and take your whole day.
No.
So Vinod, we're way excited to get into finance, wealth creation. And I think your background, it really covers a lot of what we've done on this podcast so far. And so I want to get into all that. Now, your LinkedIn, I don't know if you know this, it says that you're a dynamic finance executive.
Oh, is that what it says? I didn't know that.
Yes. I know. Nobody knows what's on their LinkedIn.
Yeah, nobody knows what's on LinkedIn these days.
I don't know what's on my LinkedIn. So, but I want to start there. You've been investing in real estate for a while. One of the things that we like to talk about here is non-traditional routes. And we've kind of talked about how so many people fall into that 9 to 5, put it in the 401k, hope to make it to 50 and hope it's good. You've gotten into real estate very early on, I remember. Like, I feel like as soon as you went to Arizona, you were getting residential rentals pulled together. So can you kind of walk me through what your mindset was as you got college degree, master's degree? Why go that route instead of just focusing on your career?
I mean, look, it wasn't a one or the other, right? I think you can do both. You can look at your career and you can also do the real estate. And I think as I graduated from MBA, got my first job post-grad in Arizona, it was my dad who was like, look, Arizona real estate is cheap. I have some excess cash. Help me invest it. Go find something for me. And at that point, I really didn't know much about real estate, but that's when I just started doing research. I would go look at a bunch of properties. And again, being in finance, I'm pretty good with Excel, so I'm running my own financial models, which, aren't that complicated if you need to create one for real estate. But that's how I got into it. And again, at the time, though, it was tough to buy stuff. Like, there was all cash offers coming from all over the place. This was 2009, the height of the recession. And so prices were at the lowest, but I saw like hundreds of properties and I just couldn't get under contract. And eventually I got one, right? And so that's how it usually starts. And at this point in my real estate career, call it, I'm pretty diverse, but it started with the residential where you buy one and you're just renting it out.
How many did you start with for residential before you switched to other stuff?
So we did 2 on the residential side, and then we started investing in apartment complexes. That's usually the next sort of natural progression, right? You go from single family to multifamily. And then eventually I started getting into group homes. So these are like medical facilities, assisted living, behavioral health within the residential communities.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that aspect. I want to go back to the beginning, though, and I think you nailed an incredible point. You didn't have, it wasn't, I've got this pile of money, so I want to, yeah. So many people think this is a huge hurdle for people to get over. I said it to you the other day, James. We were texting. You don't need money to make money. You have to have the right contacts. You have to have the right idea. You have to be knowledgeable.
Sure.
You can't just walk out and say, "Hey, I've got this idea. Somebody give me $100,000. I'm going to try it out." but you don't need your own money. So Vinod, you were kind of pushed along by your dad saying, "Hey, find me something." Have there been other situations, or I guess how do you view that? Maybe this isn't as much of a question, but kind of just open ended. Sort of how do you view that when you're evaluating properties or deals, or where you're going to get the capital, like what you're going to put in yourself versus, hey, I'm going to go find a partner or something?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how big the deal is. Like I think everybody to each their own, right? But I prefer, if I'm doing one of the residential ones, these smaller, I prefer to do it on my own, which is about 20 to 25%. But I know I've got plenty of situations where I've invested in an apartment complex. I'm not running the deal, someone else is, and they're putting maybe as little as 10% into the deal. So they're getting money from other investors, and they'll make an asset management fee, whatever, right? Whatever the deal terms are. But I prefer to put as much of my own money as I can, but 20 to 25% max. I would never go above that on any one deal.
So you said, so you've been on both sides. So you've used your money, purchased something for yourself, and you've also participated in, hey, somebody brought this deal to me, I was interested in getting involved. And
yes,
okay.
Yes. Because it's also the best way to diversify, right? I'm one person. How many deals can I really do, right? And so you, for example, in the self-storage, I've got buddies that are doing apartment complexes in Minneapolis, Arizona, Oklahoma City. And so it's the best way to diversify as well.
This James, I know you probably want to chime in here, but I love this. He's touching on diversification. We've got a podcast coming up on diversification.
Yep.
He's talking about leverage, which we talked about. Once you're in, when you get into stocks, you're sort of on your own. You get resources, you have other friends who are investing, and you come up with investment ideas. The non-traditional route, when you get into these other things, the network that you find is incredible. And so Vinod's like touching on these things of like, I started with a residential, and then this guy was doing this, and then you start to like get your hands in all these things, and you find out all these other people that are doing something similar, and it just starts to snowball.
It does. That's a good point. It really does. And you start learning so much more, right? Like the amount of knowledge that you're networking, and you're learning how someone else is doing something, and so it just starts snowballing to a point where the momentum builds, and you're gaining all this knowledge. Like you can't help but to stay in the industry, right? And just keep investing. So
that's interesting. Yeah. Do you find yourself, now that you have a bunch under your belt, do you find yourself now saying no to more deals than you say yes to? Or is it still, do you still have to kind of network and, sit down and say, all right, I think I want to get one more or go after a new apartment. Let me reach out to these people.
I'm always looking at deals. Like right now I'm under contract for another one of those like assisted living type properties. So I'm always looking. That doesn't mean a deal is going to come to fruition, right? So the deal I did before that was probably 2 years ago. So for 2 years I've been looking, and this one is panning out. So, it's one of those where you're just always kind of reviewing, analyzing, looking, and the numbers have got to make sense, right? In some cases, if they're too overpriced and rental income coming from the business operator doesn't make sense for you, then you're not going to do the deal, right? So the numbers have to pan out.
Yeah. Another question with that, on the deals you've done where somebody has kind of managed it and spearheaded it for you, do they come to the table with their own numbers, and then you're kind of looking at it on your own terms?
They will present the financials with the cash flows, cash outflows, ROI, 5-year, and then potential sale price, right? So on how you can get to those IRR numbers. That's right.
Okay.
I love this, and I definitely want to get back to the assisted living with that specific class of real estate. I do want to back out a little bit though. Part of what we talk about is just finding different routes. Real estate is another. We talk about stock market as one thing. Going this real estate route could be one thing.
Yeah.
I want to kind of zoom back out to like what keeps you going, because you talk about you keep looking at deals, but I want to kind of start with the stock market too, because it is just a traditional route. And I'm curious, Vinod, we promised we weren't going to turn this into an interview, but we're doing it. I want to talk about the stock market. And Vinod, you have a very traditional background in that, you're not 50-year-old bachelor, has all this time on his hands. Like you have a family, you have obligations, you have a regular job, but you're pursuing this thing. Why we like to go in on things here. Why avoid the stock market? What is your personal take on the stock market, I guess?
Yeah, I don't look, I've heard your episodes, Yeah, first off, you guys have done a great job. You don't sound like you've only done 5 episodes, to be honest. Like, you guys seem like seasoned vets. So kudos to you guys.
All right, you can Venmo him.
Yeah, you can pay me later now for that one. I'm not against the stock market, right? Like, I do have money in this. I'd be lying if I said I don't have anything. I've got a 401k. I contribute to that 401k. But like you guys have also touched on in previous episodes, diversification, right? That is one avenue. Yes, it's volatile, but over time that too will go up, right? I know you talked about real estate, that goes up, but I think the market does too, but it's just a little more volatile than, say, real estate, right? So I contribute to that, but it's not the end all be all, right? So this is where the real estate, I look at that as a means, not just potentially for early retirement, but it's also a way of, people have gotten very wealthy doing it, right? Finding the right niche and going in and continuing to build that and then selling at some point for X multiple. So 2 reasons: diversification and potentially early retirement. And look, if I pick the right class that other people haven't seen yet, then there's a potential to accelerate that wealth quickly, right? So
yeah, I like that. I'd like to get in maybe further down on picking that right class that no one kind of has jumped into yet. I think that's a really good point that we haven't really touched in a whole lot.
You mean real estate class or just a class in general?
Yeah, real estate class.
Yeah. How do you balance your time? You said you look at a lot of deals. I think people are slammed with their, right? They're so focused on their career. Then they come home, they're focused on their family. Where do you find the little pockets of time to pursue these things?
Yeah, I think this is the beauty of real estate. And I don't know if you remember this, Vondi. We went on I think it was the one to Lambeau. We went to watch a game, the Packers versus the Commanders in Lambeau Field. And you were asking me the question. You were like, I'm surprised you haven't quit your job and done real estate full time by now. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that specifically, but I'm so glad you brought this up.
And I remember thinking, and I'm like, yeah, why haven't I quit my job? Why am I doing this? It doesn't make any sense. So, and here's how I'm going to explain it. If 15 years ago, I was generating the same cash flows from real estate that I have right now, I probably would have never pursued a W-2 like career. But it doesn't work that way, right? It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's you plant a seed here and it's going to sprout later. And over that time, right, we've all grown in our careers. We made more money. And it's just, it gets to the point where, is it worth it to walk away? But the beauty of real estate is you don't have to walk away from your W-2, right? It's not that time intensive to a point where you can't have a full-time job and do this on the side. And right. So yes, there's work, there's due diligence before you go under transaction and get a property. But once you get the property, it kind of works for you at that point, right? You could hire a property manager. They'll find renters for you. They'll put them in. It'll cost you a little bit of money, but do you have the time to do it yourself? If not, you've got you don't have to, right? That's why. And that question actually stuck with me as to like, why haven't I? And I think that's the reason, is because I don't have to, right? Nobody has to. You can do this on the side. And yes, we all have families. We're busy. Kids are coming, right? But you can find pockets here and there, right? Even in your 8-hour workday, let's not pretend like we're all just sitting there working the entire 8 hours, right? You've got time. Okay, fine. Maybe that's just me. All right. So
I'm with
right?
you there.
So
I'm with you.
You have time, right? If you really have a passion for it and you want to do it, you're going to figure it out. And so, but again, this isn't as time intensive as other things where if you're going to make money, you have to do the work. Whereas this time you can do it one time, it'll pay for itself.
We did an episode on side hustles. There's so much here to unpack, and I'm going to try and not ramble on. James, you cut me off whenever you think that you should.
Okay.
We did an episode on side hustles, and essentially the default or the easy path is trading your time for money. Mm-hmm. It is so easy to say, I'm going to commit 8 hours to, painting pictures on a canvas and selling it on Etsy, or take orders and print something out and assemble it and ship it and do all this stuff. The next level, and that's okay. Again, I don't want to talk bad about that, because if you love painting and you can get a couple bucks for it, great. The next level is leveraging your time and your energy to those things, and Vinod said it, that work for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that Vinod brought up. I think the beauty of 401ks and kind of why they work so well, and retirement accounts in general, index funds, whatever, right, is the fact that it almost operates like a set it and forget it type deal, right? You put your money in, that, or at least have your fingers crossed that over time it will reach the amount that I need it to reach, and I don't really have to think about it. And I think one of the biggest hurdles that people mentally have in jumping into real estate or an industry similar in terms of diversification is they think that it's going to take a lot of time. They think that they're going to have to invest a ton of their time. There's a huge learning curve, whatever it is. And I think Vinod brought up a great point in the fact that it's not necessarily like that. Like, yes, there is still time, but it may be marginally more time than, managing a 401k, but it is in terms of the amount of time that you think it would take, it doesn't.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, you're doing self-storage, right? I mean, do you agree with that? Like that, right? It's just it's part of the due diligence and your transaction. Once you're done with the transaction, it kind of works for yourself.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of time in understanding the asset class. And so when we, and we can get to this here in a second, I want to learn how you came to understand the assisted living facilities, how you came into that market. I think residential is where a lot of people start because they understand, I need a home and I know how people live in homes. What I know for me personally, well, one, I didn't get into residential at a young age because as I talked about, I had that sand wedge. I didn't have any money to invest in real estate.
That's right.
I
still paying that off.
Yeah, coming into the commercial space, I didn't understand as much, so I had to get that education to understand how that worked. Before we get into this specific asset class, I do want to circle back to one thing because we touched on it very lightly. There's certainly the time, and you can invest whatever amount of time you want and understanding and trying to find deals and stuff like that. I think the other hurdle that a lot of people have when you invest in the stock market, you can take $50, you can take $100, you can throw $500 at Bitcoin, you can throw $1,000 in an index fund.
Mm-hmm.
Real estate feels like a huge investment.
Yeah.
And it's certainly more than getting into stocks, but there's also ways to dabble. Vinod mentioned, hey, somebody else had a deal and I was able to participate with a smaller amount than owning the whole thing. I guess what do you guys think about kind of overcoming that mental hurdle of like, I need $1 million to have some sort of asset that produces money for me?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you're right. I think it's just understanding kind of where you are personally and being willing to take the jump, right? And being willing to learn about that thing. I think you don't need $1 million. You don't need maybe some deals, sure. I think keeping your options open with various asset classes and going back to the D word of diversification. I think just going out there and do the due diligence of just learning and putting time into your own knowledge bank of what's out there, and then realistically what it costs to do each thing. And then from there, you can say like, all right, well, here are my options. Let me dive in and think about these. Maybe I'll learn a little bit more about these and kind of start to put that network together that, Vinod talked about earlier and kind of go from there.
There's also so many options now, right? With crowdsourcing and all that. Like you can invest online, and I don't personally do it just because I still very much like to understand the deal. I want to see it's more tangible for me when it comes to real estate. But if you're looking to invest, there's apartment complexes all over the nation that you can find out on different online platforms, right? So that's an excuse at that point, right? You're just not doing it. You can do as little work as possible, or you can do as much as you want, right? Like me, I'm probably more on the other extreme where I want to do the work. I want to see it. I want to go tour it and stuff like that. But you don't have to be that way, right? There's a pendulum. And so it's your choice.
A challenge there too is a lot of that stuff. There's the word I was going to use was gatekept. I don't know how you say that past tense. Mm-hmm. There's gatekeepers in the way. Investing in those apartment complexes or any sort of real estate deal as a passive investor where you become a limited partner. We can do a whole episode and dive into all these technical things. You might see this if you ever kind of dabble in the space. You might see it says accredited investors only. That's another way of saying your government thinks you're too dumb to figure out what you want to do with your money, and that's a fact. And I think that's I think the SEC, you run afoul of SEC laws. So you've heard on this podcast, Vondersmith Capital, that's one thing that we're doing is when we pool money for investments, that's something we have to be careful of is making sure we either have accredited investors or we're doing it in the right way per SEC law because the fines are big. I think there is some legislation being introduced to back off of some of that stuff. But essentially, that's what the government has done is they've said you're too dumb to choose where you want your money to go, and so now you have to be, being an accredited investor, which isn't hard to do. It's just like a form you have to fill out, kind of thing. But it's a way to gatekeep kind of getting into these things, which I think is really sad for a lot of people.
Yeah. So you're saying the government thinks that they know better than everyone else?
That's you've brought that up before, right?
Yeah. That's a crazy concept.
That's right. Let's go in on travel. Take me through things you've looked at, Vinod. You mentioned like different real estate things. Take me through maybe some non-real estate things maybe you've looked at. Tell me about your Bitcoin portfolio, please. And then maybe end it with, how did you find assisted living, and what excites you about that market in particular?
Yeah, look, I mean, outside of the real estate piece, look, I've dabbled in the market. I've gotten into options before, like you. I like to play poker. I like to play blackjack. So that's what option trading is, right? Yeah. So, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any stretch in any of those. I think my passion has always been with the real estate side, and so I've always gravitated back towards it. So, and to answer, I think your second question is about how did I get into the assisted living?
Yeah.
How we got there. So yeah, it's a good question. I think back in 2017, between my wife and I, we had saved up a little bit of money, not a ton, but a little bit of money. And we were making less than 1% in a savings account, like 0.5. And I wasn't going to throw that into the market. We had plenty of money in our 401k. So again, back to the diversification, I was like, well, what can I do with this? And we started thinking, well, we should just buy some kind of business, but more on a passive side, not one that we have to actively look at. And so I started doing research. And what kept coming up in my research was baby boomers. That's an industry that's going to take off at some point at that point in time, the oldest baby boomer, I think, was like 72. So over the next 20 years, there was a lot of services that were going to be required for this group of people. And so the one that kept coming up was assisted living. And through that research, the big ones where you got 100 beds, 200 beds, they were like $10 to $20 million. And I was like, well, I can't do that, right? That didn't make sense. And then as I continued to research, I learned that in almost every state, there are residential assisted livings, right? So a residential house in just a regular neighborhood can operate as assisted living. Now, it's no different than walking into a hospital or any other medical facility. They have to have a license that's licensed through the Department of Health within that state. So there's a lot of requirements for that to happen. They have to be ADA compliant, all that stuff. So I started looking at those because those were priced at a point where I can probably figure it out, the numbers. And so that's how I got into it at first. So I bought both the operations and the real estate. And look, to be frank, I'm not an operator, right? I have no idea what I was doing. I just bought this thing out of manager. And then on top of that, to add complication, we had decided we were going to move to Seattle. I still went through the transaction because at that point I was like, look, I don't know exactly the path here, but this is a good deal. I don't know why, I don't know how, but this is going to work out. We move, we get 2 new jobs, new city, and then we threw a baby in the mix. And I've got this operations on the side in Arizona. That was kind of a headache, to be honest, at that point, right? It was just sort of in the back of my mind, how do I offload this? And part of it was just the risk associated with it, right? My manager would call me every so often and say, oh, an AC broke in the middle of summer in Arizona. And I'm like, I got 90-year-old people in there. What happens if something happened to them, And so that's where my mind was, right? Half the time when really I had this little baby and a new job. And so I started looking to offload it. And my CPA came to me and was like, hey, somebody's interested. Go talk to them. So this was 3 years later. As we were talking, she wasn't looking to buy. She just needed another facility. Her operations had grown to a point where she had a wait list. And I was like, well, what if I just leased it to you? Right? Because I still want to stay within the industry somehow. And this is probably a good way for me, and given my space and my expertise and what I've done in the past, this makes more sense. And so we came to an agreement. That's how it started, right? Once I leased it and I realized I was almost getting commercial rates for residential properties. And that's when I was like, well, can I expand this, right? Can I do another one? And so that's kind of where we are right now. So that's how that started. And took about 7 years before I started leasing it versus operating the whole thing. But that was the genesis of how I got there.
Wait, say that last part again. So you're not leasing it to her anymore, or you are?
No, I am. I'm leasing. Yes, I am still leasing it.
So when you look for new ones, do you partner with her on the operations, or you've started operating?
I don't operate, so I'll buy them, and I will find an operator and lease it to them.
How many other people out there are going that route, right? Of buying to
I
lease?
wouldn't say it's like mainstream, right? Because if you think about the whole assisted living in the residential community, it's still relatively like, I would say, mom and pop run, right? So you've got people that immigrated to this country in the 70s and 80s, and they probably couldn't get a job, and they're like, all right, we're going to go do this. And so that's how, and so now they're getting older and they're trying to sell, and you're now starting to get more sophisticated operators and real estate people looking at this, but it's still not big yet. Like none of the big REITs have come in and bought these in blocks yet. So I don't know what the exit strategy is on this. It's still early to figure out, but my plan is if I can accumulate a few of these, at some point I can sell to a bigger REIT for a good cat. Like, so again, I don't know. It's still early.
I'm interested to hear more about that. So there's so many ties to storage there. It's crazy. I actually, when I sold residential real estate, I actually worked with a couple. They were an older couple, probably in their 50s. They did something very similar. They were looking for residential houses, and they had it was people with mental disabilities that they would put in there, and so they had like the nurses
Behavioral
that come
health.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually sold them, I think, 2 houses that they ended up converting, but they were the whole business. They did the operations. Their children were involved. And I remember the one son, he would, all day long, he just went from property to property, either fixing a door handle, air conditioning, whatever. I'm not trying to pivot over to self-storage here, but that's kind of like same thing you mentioned, baby boomers and people who retire, the need for storage is there, but you don't have to worry about the day-to-day, like this broke, that broke, toilet, stuff like that. You mentioned the REITs. I think that's very interesting. I want to hear more about that because when we think of, we talk about housing being unaffordable for the average person.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is, at least part of the reason, you tell me if you disagree with me, the big players came in and essentially commoditized housing, right? Built this stuff, rented out, homeownership's not what it used to be, and so now it's really expensive. It's huge in self-storage where a lot of the mom and pops have been bought up by the large REITs. So, James, you're really smart. Explain REITs in a couple sentences.
Yeah, all right, I'll try. I'm not super well versed in them, but so real estate investment trust, right?
Yep.
And they go and you can kind of buy into them. Some of them are just fully private, but they will go buy huge groups of houses or storage or apartments or all of the above. It kind of acts as an investment vehicle for the average person, can put their money into that as opposed to an index fund or something like that.
Perfect. I'm glad you said index fund. That's how I would, kind of like an index fund, but you get to invest in real estate. You don't have to be accredited. It's a nice avenue in. So they're doing that in storage now, and I'm multifamily I think is also where it's a way to kind of do economies of scale where they have access to piles of money. I think what's really interesting with what you're doing, Vinod, when I think of the REITs coming in and buying stuff up, I think of large spaces like they do. If you think of like an extra space storage, they're huge. They're huge properties, and even if they buy 5, it's 5 big properties. What you're doing is the smaller. It's like a one small plot. How would it? I guess how does a REIT? How would a REIT? Because it seems like it'd almost be a hurdle for a REIT to come into what you were talking about.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it's, given their economies of scale and the kind of money that they want to invest in, it doesn't make sense for them to come and look at one, right? So if somebody has a portfolio of 10 to 20, now they may just buy that chunk from them. Then it makes more sense, right? Given the cash inflows. But again, too early, right? So I don't even know if they're interested, if they're looking at it. My gut is saying yes. It's no different than the storage space where it was owned by mom and pops. And honestly, I learned a lot when I went to Albuquerque with you, talking to some of your other storage colleagues there, and how they were monetizing those investments and selling it to different. And it just kind of like triggered in my head, like that's my path on this as well. Like that's what it could be.
That's amazing. And I wanted to make this point earlier, and I think it's a good spot to bring it in now. So when going back to residential, I worked for a guy named Pat Hyben up in Maryland. He's a huge influence on me. I'm hoping if we can do it right with guests, he'll come on as a guest sometime. So that's trophy guest right there, Pat Hyben. I'm just putting that out in the universe.
Yeah.
Pat has written a couple books. He's done tons of real estate investing. A lot of people might know it. It's called GoBundance. It's a collection of wealthy individuals. They kind of, it's in networking, and I'm not describing it right. I just lost it. Now he's not going to come on. But he wrote he wrote a book when I was trying to figure out, just like you said, Vinod, I wanted something passive and something I can get involved in. When I was going through that exercise myself, I happened upon a podcast he did, and he co-wrote a book called Quit, and it talks about leaving your 9 to 5 to pursue whatever you're passionate in, because it is a big leap of faith. And one of his points was, we're saying that it is you're jumping off a cliff into the unknown, but what we're saying is there's a trapeze there that you can grab. That trapeze, and what you're talking about, Vinod, is the people you meet along the way. And I think that as you evaluate non-traditional, again, we talked about agency. When you're 401k, stock market, you have no agency. Yes, you take a leap of faith into something maybe you don't know, but Vinod met an operator. He happened to meet people at a conference he wasn't even attending, but he met people that sort of gave him this idea of, I can package multiple together. And so it's really just that first hurdle, and it's amazing who you meet along the way that helps you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And something that I feel like is so underutilized with everybody sitting behind a computer nowadays, right? It's like all you have to do is talk to someone, find someone, reach out to anyone, and most of the time they're happy to talk. Even if they're super successful, in most cases, they're still willing to give you some advice or answer a question or whatever. So even if it's just like a simple email, building that network is definitely the first step.
Yeah. Who would you say has given you the most boost, Vinod, besides me?
Yeah, I was gonna say you've won, obviously. I would say my wife, to be honest. Like, Priya's been super supportive in all of this. And to be honest, when I first started, I don't know if she quite got it, right? And I remember we were getting married, and we got married a little bit later in life, in our mid-30s, right? So we had, we were pretty established in our careers, and we had money, so we paid for our own wedding. And I remember I was going to take a chunk of money and go invest it in a real estate thing, and where she was putting some more of it into the wedding. And we had a little argument about it at that time. But fast forward, and now she sees that investment is worth like 8x, 10x what we put in. She gets it, right? She's now like, she gets the whole like planting the seed and letting it sprout later. And now she's super invested. She's like, just go for it. Like, go do whatever you have to do. And we even talked about me doing this full time at some point. But again, it's just one of those where I don't have to. Like, I can do this passively and still generate income and figure it out. So I think she's been key.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point there. Again, I want to touch on the planting the seed and letting it grow. I feel like in today's society, so many people, right, they're totally fine with letting their 401k grow at 2% a year, 3% a year. And like, that's totally fine to them. But then if they have any extra capital that they're trying to invest or they want to invest, they're not happy unless it's like 20x, 50x, right? It's like they want to see that the next GameStop or the next meme coin that skyrockets to the moon and they make overnight wealth. And it's like, if you're okay with your 401k, like maybe you should look at all of your investment opportunities that way as well. Of like, you can get huge returns in a ton of different areas, but plant that seed and be willing to let it grow.
Couldn't have said it any better. This has been awesome. Vinod, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, listen, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a lot of fun. Hopefully invite me back. I know I'm the first.
Welcome to come back whenever.
Yes, we'll definitely have you back. Vinod's out in Arizona. For our listeners that want to learn more about assisted living, or more importantly, profiting off of other people's donations.
That's not what we do, by the way. You're going to have to edit that out. We're going to talk about that one afterwards.
That is not, I want to go on record as stating that is not what Vinod's company does. That is what I choose to describe Vinod's company as doing.
Yes.
Which is not true. This is my own fantasy land that I live in. Okay? But I'm not going to stop saying it because it's too fun. Yeah. It's way too fun to keep saying. So if they wanted to hit you up and maybe learn more about assisted living or investing in general, where could they find you?
I'll send you my contact info, email, phone number, and all that stuff, and then you can share it with your listeners.
That's fantastic. I'm going to put your cell phone number in the show notes.
Text him whenever.
Yep. He never silences his notifications. So, Vinod, before you go, we're gonna sing the Eagles fight song real quick. You ready, James? One,
Yeah.
2, 3.
All right, I gotta go. How do we get out of this? How do you...
Vinod, thank you again.
Are you an Eagles fan too, James?
I am. Yeah.
I wish you had told me this before I came on the show.
Well, you wouldn't
that
have
both of
come,
you were
right?
Eagles
So we had to.
fans. Yeah, I wouldn't have come. That's right.
You've
Are you
known
kidding me right now?
You've known me for 20 years, and you would think I'd do a podcast with somebody who is not an Eagles fan? That's insanity. I'm starting to
Well,
question.
congrats to you guys. You guys had a great year. You had a good team.
It was a fun season.
Thank you.
All right, Vinod, thank you.
Well, we're coming next year. Don't worry. All right, see you guys.
That was fun.
That was awesome.
Yeah. What? There's so many takeaways. You know, I like that it fits in with a lot of what we've been talking about. I guess
really
what is your one takeaway from Vinod that you weren't thinking about before today?
I just thought it was fascinating that, kind of two things. One, that he has a fully established career that he's super successful with. And it's like proof in the pudding, right? Like we sit here and people, they may go to our LinkedIn and know what we do, and we have full-time jobs and things like that. But to hear somebody else come on and kind of reiterate what we're talking about is a huge validation point for us that I really like. I really thought that was great, and it kind of showed everyone, like even especially like business owners too, right? Like I've got a landscaping company. I don't have time to get into real estate. I'm just going to dump it in the stock market and deal with that. This kind of showed like you don't have to do that. That's one. Two, I think the assisted living piece was gold. I think that's just going into our whole spectrum of like, this is what we want to do. This is kind of where we're going. I think is here's an industry that maybe nobody even knows exists. I thought that was great.
Yeah. I think for me, I love his thoughtful nature in which he evaluates this stuff. It's not just, I saw somebody on TikTok buying a residential or assisted living, so I said, hey, let me try it and see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, he uses a skill set that he has, finance, builds his own evaluations to figure out like what's a good idea and what he wants to get into. So
yep,
I love it. James, this was good. Another Control Alt Invest.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time.